Yep.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium's and EIG's webinar on the Trust Matrix, turning trust into measurable, governable capability. Before we begin, we want to obviously get your perspective on what's going on, so please do use the chat and the poll EV throughout. Today's webinar sheds light on organizations don't fail for lack of insight, but they fail because trust isn't engineered into the decisions actually are made. So trust is not engineered into how decisions actually get made. Come on, Jim. We appreciate that you're taking the time today. My name is Jim DeVries. I'm the founder and of the Enhance International Group and Chief Strategy Officer for the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. I'll be the host of today's webinar, and I'm located in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, in case you're wondering. And EIG was
Mm.
established in 2017. And Greg Schlegel from Lewis, Delaware, is the founder of the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium, established in 2010, way back when. And Greg has 40 years of experience in supply chain management, supply chain risk management, and it's one of the founding fathers of the discipline of supply chain risk management, and has a book out there called Supply Chain Risk Management in Emerging Discipline back in 2015, the Wayback Machine, as we talked before. And he's also former president of ASCM. With that, we just want to talk a little bit about the series. This is the second in the series of webinars on trust, and we're just trying to drive this conversation forward from our MXD Department of War project. Last month's webinar focused on the transparency myth and why trust alone never scales without trust, why that occurs. And today we're looking at the trust matrix, turning trust into measurable, governable capability. Next month, at the end of the month, we'll be getting into the Trust Acceleration Index and managing what actually accelerates decisions. Then we'll get into something called the Quality Interaction Index. It's not the data, it's the interaction and how we work together, putting the personal, interpersonal relationship part of this. Then we'll get into the N-tier supply chain transparency exchange, e-exchange, the design of that and what we're building out with that, and then how everything fits together and how it can be deployed within your four walls and up and downstream. And we would probably say you probably want to deploy this first within your four walls before you go up and downstream. With that, I turn it over to Greg.
Yep, you bet. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate the time, folks. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. To talk about trust in the supply chain. Pretty important, we feel, and we have a lot to share with you. So, what do you learn today? One thread. Trust is not one directional. We've seen this from our projects. Suppliers evaluate customers as well. Remember that. That's what we'll talk about today, called reciprocity, which shapes the system behavior within the trust ecosystem. What you'll learn why high-performing suppliers still withhold critical data within their supply chain. We'll also talk about how the performance willingness gap, something we developed out of our 12-month project with the Department of War, how that reveals hidden system friction. We'll talk about that today. You'll also learn about why importance doesn't equal willingness to share in the real supply chain world. A couple more. We'll talk about how reciprocity fundamentally reshapes transparency across the tiers from insight we've gleaned from our project. And then finally, what it means to make trust observable, quantitative, and governable. So we have a lot to share with you today. We're pretty excited about this thread called trust within the supply chain. So with that, I'll give you a quick thumbnail sketch of who we are and what we do at the SCRM Consortium. We're about 33 companies, about 1,700 professionals around the globe. We operate in 23 countries, and we have three tiers or three pillars, if you will, on the right side. We started with education. We still advocate education. I'll talk about that in a minute. We do a heck of a lot of consulting where we lead, guide, direct, and coach companies on their supply chain risk and resiliency journey. And then we have a host of heavyweight software companies, software as a service, cloud organizations who do the heavy lifting in terms of modeling and developing a computer model, digitizing your supply chain, and then working on supply chain risk and resilience. Our offerings are over on the left. We have two certificate courses. They're online, self-paced. You get a certificate. One is geared towards manufacturing, and the other is geared towards healthcare and logisticians. We do a lot of work with healthcare around the globe. We have an online readiness assessment that is measuring your supply chain process maturity across 13 tenants. We have another one, pure risk online survey and tool that is driven by AI ML algorithms, and it identifies through questions of discovery where you are on our 5-stage maturity in risk, who you are, what's your risk appetite as a corporation, and then what is your operating culture. Risk is all about culture. When the tool gets that information, it then provides you 5 to 8 action items with a high probability of success. We have a brand new, we're going to talk about it today, the Online Trust Acceleration Index. We'll get into that. We do consulting, and we have a host of heavyweight solutions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And Enhance International Group, we're a group of about 80 partners covering people, process, data, technology to deliver self-sustaining growth. And our vision and brand today is talking about trust acceleration is where our focus is. And we're focused across our enterprise of creating your trust cadence by bringing in all of that intellectual property of all those different folks and those thoughts and ideas. So I'm just going to switch right into the webinar today. Uh, for today's webinar, let's walk through on how we're going to move through here and why trust. We'll start off with why trust becomes measurable. In most supply chains, trust is treated as a soft, intangible concept, yet it drives very hard outcomes: data sharing, responsiveness, and collaboration. If we can't measure it, we can't manage it. Number two, from there, we'll introduce how the trust matrix works, focusing on the dynamics between performance and willingness. This gives us a structured way to understand not only just what suppliers can do, but what they are actually motivated to do. Third, we're set up here we'll take a deep dive into the performance willingness gap, PWG. We always have to come up with new acronyms. And this is where this hidden friction lives, and the capability exists. But behavior doesn't follow. Understanding this gap is the key to diagnosing why expected outcomes often fail to materialize. Next, we'll expand the lens and reciprocity and its impact on both supplier and customer behavior. This is where the model becomes systematic. Actions on one side of the relationship directly influence transparency, engagement, and trust on the other. And then number 5, we'll shift from the insight to action, positioning trust as a governance lever. We'll explore how the mechanisms like entitlements, incentives, and visibility gating can be designed to actively shape behavior, not just monitor it. And then finally, we'll get into the key takeaways and introduce the Trust Acceleration Index, or TAI, which provides a practical way to operationalize everything we've discussed and drive measurable improvement over time. So we're going to get started here on why the trust must become measurable. And before I just get into it, let's just talk a little bit about this first and arguably the most important idea of this session on why trust must become measurable. Today's most Today, most organizations treat trust as an intangible, as Greg earlier said. It sits in surveys, relationship reviews, or general sentiment, but it's rarely managed with the same rigor or cost, service, and quality, and that it creates a blind spot. So we have blind spots on trust because we don't believe it's measurable, and so it's not governable. And when it is not governable, it directly limits transparency. So with that, we'll get right into why trust has become quantitative.
Mhm.
So why it had to become quantitative. So uh, first, the narrative trust. Organizations say things like, we've had strong relationships or we trust our partners, but then disruption hits and those narratives don't hold. Decisions slow down, data gets questioned, and behaviors changes. We've all been there. Second, we start using surveys and then the surveys get tired and old. We've all seen them. Annual relationship surveys, supplier scorecards, they capture sentiment in a moments in time, and then they don't capture behavior under pressure. And more importantly, they don't reveal the trust actually breaks down in the system. Third, we talk about relationship strength metrics. These are often based on tenure, familiarity, or frequency of interaction, but high performing, long tenured partners still withhold critical data. So clearly, relationship strength is not the same as operational trust. So, with that, I'll turn it over to Greg.
You bet. Thanks, Jim. We'll start with kind of the trust matrix story, a little bit of what has come out of our 12-month project. And the question always entered and attempted to answer is, especially from our clients, is why do capable partners choose not to share data? Well, the answer is because importance doesn't equal willingness to share. Hopefully, we'll explain that going forward in our presentation. It's a big deal. Many people think that when everything's important, nothing's important. And the importance, what we've seen through the project, is that data importance doesn't necessarily equal the willingness to share that data. And so we'll give you more context on that in a minute. So let's start with the trust matrix concept. Over on the right-hand side, we'll start with this graph. I'll give you a little thumbnail sketch. On the y-axis on the left is supply chain performance, company performance, from low to high. On the x-axis is the willingness to share data. All right. And that goes from low on the left to high on the right. And you have a 2x2. What we have seen, a lot of folks tend to start down in the southwest quadrant, the far left bottom quadrant, which is kind of hesitation and what we call opacity, all right, of data, which means I covet my data. I hesitate and I covet. Why do you want to see that data? What we see is if you're in that quadrant and you start to leverage technology, you can improve your operational performance, but without transparency. So it's kind of a muscling approach. The other thread where companies go is they start in the hesitation and opacity, then they move to the right. and they start to talk about the willingness to share, improve the willingness to share, get alignment with their partners, and perhaps end up in the perfect, or I'll say the optimal northeast quadrant, the green quadrant, which is openness and execution. And hopefully we'll share with you, you'll witness what can be done when about performance when there is a sharing of the data. So with that, let's just go to a couple of bullets. Two dimensions on the trust matrix. One, reality. Execution is consistent, consistent execution. And the second bullet is the willingness. It's the intent to share when it matters with your partners. So the net is most programs measure only one. And the follow on the bottom on the right of the slide is trust to us is no longer subjective. It is observable. We can measure it now and it's actionable. So that's the exciting part of coming out of our project. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jim.
So we'll turn it into the first survey question on ranking what you believe most influences supplier willingness to share data from the most to least important for your organization or company. So we just ask you to enter in there into Poll EV and start ranking. We can kind of see that we've got started a bit here on what rank you believe. So is it executive leadership, program management, procurement, sourcing, external platforms, government compliance, and one sneaking at the bottom, engineering. So what do you believe most influences supplier willingness to share data from the most to least important? So when we did our project, we spoke to folks in all these disciplines, and we had some very interesting conversations, would you say, Greg?
I would definitely say interesting and impactful.
But program management leadership coming up on top seems like if that kind of sets the cadence of the organization. If they are unwilling to support that, some leaders don't even know this is going on. This is the problem. They think my observation is that the leaders don't even know. They think they're sharing all the data they need until you talk to the supplier. And most supplier scorecards, as we know, are one-sided. You grade the supplier, but the supplier doesn't grade you.
Yep.
So no reciprocity.
Nope.
So this is interesting. So if you have any comments, Greg, on this?
Uh, no, it's it is an opinion. It's an observation. You never know. I think, Jim, you're right with it always starts at the top. If the executive leadership, from what we've seen over the years, if the tone and tenor is not directional and it's not clear, you're going to get what you get. All right. So I could see that. Uh, if you're in defense with program management in the defense arena, the key, the individuals who drive the bus are the program managers of the OEMs. We know that.
Hmm. Yep.
And that's understandable. And again, tone and tenor. If they don't reinforce the issue of sharing data, it's not going to happen. Sad, but true.
Yeah. So it's a combination of program management and leadership. From an execution perspective, obviously program management is going to have a bigger play than
Yep.
leadership. But without the leadership setting the tone, you won't have a program management team working on it. So that's a tough one to answer. Uh,
Yep. Yep. Appreciate the feedback.
yeah,
Again, it somewhat reinforces what we have seen over through this project. So appreciate the engagement.
yeah. Thanks so much. with that, we'll move
Hmm.
on. Greg?
Yep. Yeah, we'll go to our next section, how the trust matrix works. And we'll talk a little bit about performance versus willingness. And if we can move on, we'll look at the matrix, trust matrix picture again. All right. In terms of we just went through the recap of the two by two. And let's just talk a little bit more about performance versus willingness. So a couple of bullets on the left are high performance does not guarantee transparency, folks. Hope you saw that. That's why we give you the two by two. You can move forward and improve performance, but it's not a guarantee in terms of transparency, and ultimately it may atrophy. The other bullet is low transparency is rarely a capability problem. It's a behavior problem. All right. So the last bullet we have, willingness to share is behavioral. I know it's touchy feely. It's not technical. This is never a technical issue, a technology issue. It's a behavior issue. We're thoroughly convinced of that going through this project for 12 months. So the net on the bottom, we have a couple of threads for you. The MXD Trust Project, one of the insights, willingness is not a capability, it's the primary constraint on transparency. That's what we gleaned from the project and gave it to our client. We have several quotes from the executives who participated in the project. One was, we had the data and the systems, but that wasn't the issue. The real constraint was whether people were willing to share and act on that data. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
So this now brings up this whole concept of the willingness gap to identify what critical data should flow but doesn't and why it impacts execution. So this was probably one of our big ahas is like as we were putting this together is that everything so far that we had come up with was, as Greg said, is are you willing to share, and what does that put you at risk at when you do share? So people felt very, would you say, Greg, uh, 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 exposed when they share data or share information.
Yep.
And because of that, they said, well, we're not going to share because we need to protect our IP. I don't know how many times we heard that throughout our study.
Hundreds. Yeah, hundreds.
You know, it's the IP. We're worried about our IP. We're worried. But then what are you willing to share? Well, we're not going to share. So the tendency is not to share, to err on not sharing. And that, of course, stops the data, the flow. So as we know, our competition across the pond there in China, they don't have that at all. They share data because nobody has the rights. So by definition, we are slower. The free world is slower. Free market society is slower than our nearest big competitor, being China. So again, so the PWG, focused on uh, shows where the data should be flowing but isn't. There are moments when the information exists and the decisions require it. Everyone knows it's critical, and yet it never shows up. That delay, that hesitation, that absence of signal, that's a system failure. That's where there's a willingness gap. So there's a willingness to share. Of course, we say it a little shorter when we say willingness. It's that willingness to share. And second, the PDW revealed that the ecosystem drag is being created. This is where the supply chain slows down. Extra buffers get added. Decisions get escalated. Redundant checks are introduced, not because people want inefficiency, but because they don't trust what they're receiving. So they compensate, and that compensation creates friction. So what we often call is hedging, where everybody's hedging everything. I hedge you, you hedge me, everybody's a hedge, you know? And then the third is where the behavior suppresses signal. And this is the most important. PWG shows where your own behavior or governance is suppressing the signal. And in many cases, it's not the supplier withholding the data. It's the system around that makes sharing irrational. If sharing data exposes risk, creates penalties, reduces leverage, or it's used against them, the rational response is we're not going to share. We've all seen it,
Mhm.
we've bid it, we've lived it. So with that, we talk about where the signal breaks down across the ecosystem. So we'll cover three areas: the healthy flow, the ecosystem drag, and the signal suppression. So the healthy flow, starting with that, there's high willingness. In this state, signals move freely across. Information is timely, trusted, and acted upon, importantly, and the system already has the capability to perform. The pipes are open and the willingness is high, so performance can be fully expressed. So you see this in the exemplars. Companies like Cisco, of course, their data is flowing up and down their supply chain. Apple, the all the exemplars that we heard on Gartner's last week, you'll see that they are able to flow data up and down. And then the second in the middle, we encounter ecosystem drag, delay and distortion. Here the signal is still moving, but it's slowed down and altered. Handoffs introduce friction because we need audits, right? And incentives misalign and data loses fidelity. And the system hasn't failed, but it's no longer synchronized. So it's hurry up and wait. We all lived in that world, huh? Performance starts to degrade, not because capability disappeared, but because flow is no longer clean. And then the third is this signal suppression. So performance in this capacity to flow, but willingness to flow, uh, willingness is the permission to flow. So I'll open up the valve when I'm allowed to. When somebody tells me I can do it. So that we see breakdowns there. The question is, do we have the ability? So it's not that we have the ability or we have the data, it's where are we losing the willingness to let the signal move. So as MXD Project Insight there, you see there, flow is constrained by willingness to share, not the system capability. So as you see, performance equals capacity to flow and willingness permission to flow. With that, we move on to why importance is not willingness. Greg brought this up earlier in the slides, and this captures one of the most inconsistent and misunderstood failure problems we have seen. So on the graph here, we have on the x-axis low willingness to high willingness to share, and on the y-axis low performance to high performance. And obviously, we want to be in that upper right-hand quadrant. And, if you're up in the upper left, where you want to get high performance, but you're not willing to share, the likelihood is probably you're locked in an environment that's not really sharing information. So when you have failures, they're isolated and you're not able to build that balance across your supply chain because nobody knows where the other failures are occurring, and we don't know how we're impacting others. And then if you have low performance, but you have a high willingness to share, the, the willingness is inconsistent. So with that, we have these common failures. Data is critical. Common failures. And partners still withholds. So we're kind of setting ourselves up for failure here. Every organization says the same thing, that data is critical. We need it to run our business. We've told our partners how important it is, and yet the partner still withholds it. And And that's the contradiction. The data is critical, but it's not shared. I think we've all lived that quite a bit. Uh, the common mistake, and that's where most organizations go wrong, they interpret that as a capability issue, a compliance issue, or even a performance issue. So what do? Add more technology. That's what we do. More widgets, mandate reporting, governance, increase pressure, and we all know none of that works, right? So the real reasons are because the real drivers are completely different. The incentives are misaligned, right? First incentives are misaligned. If a partner gets no benefit from sharing, or worse, gets penalized for transparency, the rational decision is to hold back and not share. And risk is asymmetric. Sharing often exposes more risk to the supplier than the customer. Price visibility and performance exposure, forecast risk. If the downside is theirs, the upside is yours. So you can't come up with win-wins there with your suppliers. And then governance is missing. The third area, and there are no clear rules for how data will be used, how who sees it, how it affects decisions. So from the partner's perspective, sharing becomes unpredictable. So when we connect all the dots, data can be critical and still not be shared. We've seen that, right? So because importance does not drive behavior, incentives, risk, and governance drive behavior, as it says right here. So with that, I'll turn it over to Greg.
Yep. Yeah, we have a couple of questions. Hold those thoughts. We'll get to those. Let us get through a couple more threads, and then we'll attempt to answer the questions that are in the chat. Good questions. So, because we want to inject what we call reciprocity and its impact on your supplier behavior. All right. I'm not really going to go through the graph. I'm more concerned about sharing with you the bullets of uh, suppliers have to evaluate you as a customer. Essentially, what you see in the graph is, yeah, you can evaluate your customer or your supplier, and it's normally a one-way deal. And we don't even ask for feedback from our supplier. That's not a good thing. That's not impacting or not improving transparency and flow of data. So the trust matrix informs this approach because we're advocating it's got to be bi-directional. You got to be able to assess your suppliers and then have your suppliers assess you. And we're going to show you that outcome in a minute, but it's got to be bi-directional. And it the trust matrix enforces symmetric accountability. All right. So what you don't know can and will hurt you. And once you understand the gap between your two assessments about how you share data, that is where the money comes. That's where the juice is. Is the juice worth the squeeze? It is, in our opinion. And finally, uh, it makes it observable. It makes trust observable to both parties. That's the key because trust is not one directional. It's reciprocal. All right. That's our thread to you. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Great. Thanks, Greg. And, we get into the trust factor that actually move behavior. So we identified over 25 trust factors throughout the project, and we're just going to highlight a few of them here that came out to be, and they're not necessarily the most important. Every company will have different trust factors that are important to them relative to their relationships within their company in different parts of their company as well as their suppliers and customers. So timeliness is the first uh, behavior here. Predictability, uh, and then we get into and predictability is partners need to know how you'll behave. Will you react consistently? Will decisions be stable? If your actions are unpredictable, they will limit what they share. So that's predictability. And then timeliness, I think we all know what timeliness is. That's why I kind of skipped it over. But of course, it's that information arrives late, even when it's accurate, it loses value. So we all are familiar with that. Psychological safety that you may or may have heard of before. Can a partner share bad news without being penalized? If the environment is punitive, transparency disappears. So, do you get rewarded when you tell of a failure? In other words, governance clarity. How will the data be used? Who sees it? What decisions does it trigger? If it's unclear, sharing becomes a risk. So that governance is a big area that we found. And non-punitive use. This is what we heard resounding throughout all the interviews. And this is one of the strongest drivers. If information is used to penalize, score, or expose, that for sure is going to cause problems. So these factors do something very important. They translate trust from a belief into something you can design, measure, and influence. And it's from these trust factors and the definitions that the team came up with these uh, that really made the difference, I think, in the project. And so we have a quote here in the Department of War Trust Project. Trust was not defined by intent, but what consistently improved timeliness, predictability, and decision confidence across the network. So with that, we'll move into the trust as a governance lever. Explore how trust drives decisions through entitlements, incentives, and visibility control. So why opinions don't count. So the trust management rules, correlations, thresholds are required, right? We need to have those thresholds. We also need to have signals greater than the sediments. So we can't rely just purely on sediment anymore. And so, we need that to be addressed, patterns and antidotes. We can't just rely on antidotes anymore. So we got to move, and trust must be observable. So we have to figure out why we got to move from this credibility issue and differentiation area of the soft talk that we often talk about in and sharing of information, and come up with a rigorous and data-driven way to link everything. So this is what we heard resoundingly throughout. Trust is not what people say, it is what the system consistently demonstrates through observable signals and outcomes.
Mhm.
So trust as a governance lever. This is a critical shift in the action as we move from insight to control to executive decision making. So trust informs us and becomes, informs us from entitlements, incentives, visibility gating, escalation thresholds, and the governance becomes adaptive, not static. So again, the entitlements on who gets access to the information and when, not everyone gets the same visibility. The incentives, if you want transparency, you have to reward for it. Organizations often expect openness, but don't align incentives to support it. Visibility gating, this is where it gets very practical. You can dynamically adjust what is shared based on the level of trust in a relationship. High trust is increased visibility, low trust, controlled or phased visibility. Not a punishment, but as risk management. And then fourth, we talk about escalation thresholds. When should something trigger escalation? Traditional models escalate based on performance alone, but trust adds a second dimension. Is the partner engaged? Are they transparent? Are they signaling early? What changes and how you intervene and at what time. So trust starts to shape the operating model. So the cadence, how you're operating your company. So governance becomes adaptive, not static. So we always say, well, we want to reach a state of performance, but the ecosystem is changing all the time. If the ecosystem is changing anymore every day, every moment, you have to have a compensating system. So moving more into the concept of an operating ecosystem. So the quote here on the project is demonstrated that trust is not a sentiment. It's a control mechanism that dynamically shapes, assesses, incentivizes, and provides decision rights across the network. So that's what we gained from our 50 people that we interviewed on designing something. And that was the problem statement of sorts to us. Would you say, Greg?
Yep, agreed.
So with that, we started to look at things from a macro view, and we'll look at it from three different perspectives: logistics, production, and engineering. And you can see what we found is the logistics folks were speed driven, so timeliness as a trust factor, and that's why that's green, is the most important. Whereas the production folks were worried about stability and predictability. So that's where predictability became a green. That's why there's a green there. And then engineering is more about psychological safety and governance that we just talked about, and that's predominant for them. And this is just how the data came out from the between the interviews and the surveys that we did. This is how they ranked the factors according to those three different perspectives. So it's always the eye of the beholder that we say.
Hmm.
So as you can see, trust is and willingness dynamics are across the board. So when you have an organization and you have different folks across your organization uh, prioritizing trust factors differently, it's it's a bit of a challenge to manage that from a leadership perspective and a program management perspective because they're often contradictory. So in logistics, trust is about speed. If the signal isn't timely, we don't act. In engineering, it's the opposite. It's not safe or governed. Well, we don't move at all. So that's to us that was a big of a aha and confirmation of what we might think intuitively, but as far as we know, nobody had ever put this together in the way that this analysis showed. Greg, any comments on that?
No, I'm kind of more or less looking. I think it's a very good perspective, and we actually, in the project, tried to embrace all the perspectives from a discipline point of view, as Jim mentioned, logistics, production, and engineering. The individuals who answered the survey, about 175, and the folks we talked to, and in our 4 or 5 collaborative workshops, this is what we gleaned in terms of what we heard and trying to share that with you. So, yes, trust is different in different disciplines and by different types of industries. But the factors which we're going to talk about a little bit more are all in there. It's just that the perspective in terms of what's important and what is willing to share is a little different by discipline and by size and by industry. So
Yeah, Mark asked where data
yep.
accuracy is. We don't have that ready to share at this point in time. We can
Yep.
take that offline, but we have it ranked, but not in this presentation.
Hmm.
But but obviously data accuracy is one of the trust factors,
Yep.
without a doubt.
Yes. Yes, it is.
So that I can say with 100% confidence. Where it is relative to engineering or manufacturing or logistics or sales or any one of the different perspectives, I guess I'll give the lawyer answer. It depends. That's what we
Mhm.
that's what we found. So uh, so with that, we have one more survey here and ranking in order that the biggest to largest performance willingness gaps that exist today within your organization. Do you think it's the willingness to share is the gaps are within logistics, production, engineering, the commercial area, or I guess, the cost data? I guess that'd be finance, risk and disruption signals. Where do you see the biggest uh, versus the smallest willingness to share gaps in your company or organization? So with that, ask folks to start entering in. Uh, so Greg, any comments on that as they're entering in? We can answer some of these questions as we can try to answer them.
Yeah, I thought we'd answer them before we go into the last section.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
for Eric says for those OEMs that best overcame the PWG with their suppliers, what types of actions did they undertake to engender more trust? Uh, so that's one question. I would say it's a reciprocity is what we found. For the best in class exemplars, whether it's an OEM or any other company, are the people that had shared win-win relationships and they
Yep.
shared the data equally. They did not, there was no one up on the other from between, you know, this is looking more up and downstream uh, from suppliers to manufacturers to customers.
Mhm.
And
Yep, I can answer that as well. What I've gleaned in the 12 months and before with exemplars is they collaborate. They talk to each other. They sit down and have meetings and they collectively decide what's important, what they need to share, and they improve the trust. It's a relationship thing. If you only do it one way, it's just not gonna improve. So that's what I have seen in terms of actions by the exemplars.
and then Eric wrote, suppliers are assessing their customers. The real question, as you point out, is whether the customer solicits and is interested in acting on the assessment of their suppliers. Well, yeah. Yeah, if you're going to open up the door, you better be ready. So you better
Yep.
have the executive cover to be able to handle that and escalate. And it probably will be not in your modus operandi, your normal operating procedures. You're going to have to get executive cover to start addressing those things. Some are easy from my experience in doing this. Some are easy and some are very difficult, but you do need a C-suite support in doing the win-wins. That's very clear.
Mhm.
So very interesting ranking the order, cost and commercial data, number one. That makes a lot of sense. Uh, and engineering changes, ECNs, yeah, that's always who owns the bomb. That's the kind of the joke that goes around. The site, if you're building something on a site, the bill of material is always changing. In heavy industry building products, when you're building widgets, it's a little bit different. It's all contained within manufacturing and engineering. When you get into field installations and things like that, it gets much more complex. Production capacity. Yeah, that comes up a lot, Greg. Capacity, right?
Oh, yeah. What we've heard a lot of times from customers through our 12-month project is about their suppliers. If only they gave us a heads up earlier than they did. And here's the reason why. One is fear. Fear drives the bus in trust. That's hands down. But what we heard from customers is, well, if only our supplier would have told us 2 weeks earlier, we could have helped them with their production issue. We would have helped them to move it along. We've heard that time and time again by customers, no matter what industry and what size, because there's a fear from the supply side of what are you going to do with that data? And if I give you bad news, as Jim said, if I give you bad news, you're going to penalize me. It's fear, folks. Absolutely, positively, the bus driver at the moment.
All right. So we're gonna make Mark happy here and try to answer his question about performance. He says he's confused on the definitions of performance, data flow performance versus business performance. Greg, you want to take a
Yeah,
stab at it?
I saw that. You're right, Mark. The 2x2 we showed you, it doesn't really indicate and profile the flow of data. All right. The flow, it's somewhat, I'll say this, the flow of data is somewhat ethereal. All right. The outcome of that flow, whether it's, pipe engineering, if the pipe increases, you can get into what is it, fluid dynamic discussions, which we don't have time for. But the net is the flow, as the flow increases in frequency, transparency, trust improves, and then the activities, which we'll talk about, one of the benefits of increased flow of data and transparency is trust. And when you have high trust, you have a low cost and you have the speed of activity increases. That chart does not really indicate that. That's my best shot at
Okay.
that.
I'll hopefully that supports what he was looking for.
I don't.
I think
Uh,
I couldn't
I
do much
try.
better than that. I can't do any better than that. All right. So I got nothing to add there. Probably I'll talk to Mark later about it. All right. So we'll close it out here. Some key takeaways. Again, the trust acceleration index and this trust matrix, it's powered by these 25 trust factors. The reciprocal trust assessment, which is a second assessment. There's two assessments. That's between the supplier and the manufacturer, let's say, or two adjacent organizations. And that's the 10 to 12 minutes. The first one takes about 20 to 30 minutes. And then we provide this benchmark consultation. Again, we really believe that you should look behind your own kimono first before going outside, figure out how this works and how you're going to manage these decisions and decision making, and really how you're going to manage the change management that needs to occur because you're opening yourself up. If you want to have a truly collaborative relationship, you need to be very open. And so test it within your phone four walls first, get familiar with it. Then maybe it's easier to go to your manufacturer, you as a manufacturer, go to your supplier. That may be the easiest way to go next. And then uh, I think people are really scared when they go to their customer and they ask them how they feel. That's the other way to go, and that's a little bit less what's in control of you, and you got to get ready to respond to the customer. So uh, we will certainly get. We're very willing to get started in a trial basis to show you how it works, and a no cost trust assessment within your four walls or with a supplier of your choosing. If you already have high trust with a supplier and you want to sit down and map this out, we can certainly do that with you. With that, I'll turn it over to Greg.
Yeah, we wanted to answer one of the questions or actually a statement from Dave that There is a high cost to low trust. You are absolutely correct. And what we have attempted to do through this project and other discussions with our clients is to kind of profile the benefits of measuring trust. It's a busy slide. We wanted to share that with you. You can see the use cases on the left. You can see the primary KPIs that we all know and love in supply chain management. Here are some of the expected improvements, some customer quotes that we've garnered, the TAI trust factors associated with those use cases, and they all come from, down on the bottom, the Edelman Trust Barometer, which has been around for 10, 12 years, from the University of Tennessee, who shared a host of caselets and use cases with us. And the net, folks, is on trust. When trust is present, uh, uh, when trust is present, folks, as Stephen Covey has said, costs drop in the supply chain and speed of activities accelerate. Those two threads to us is a strategic advantage. All right. So with that, we'll close it out and talk about what we're doing. We're actively pursuing about 10 or 12 companies for alpha testing of the actual TAI methodology. We're starting to build out collaborative workshops with a couple of entities, organizations, all in an attempt to build out trust and flesh out the Trust Acceleration Index to measure trust and then reiteratively improve trust over time. And we think that's a strategic advantage. And feel free to contact us down the bottom right. You can put in a consortium inquiry. You can go right into the Trust Acceleration Index tab or page in our website. And you can also invoke the supply chain transparency survey, all at no cost. So we wanted to share that with you, and I'll turn it back to Jim.
So, just our key takeaway, trust is no longer subjective. I hope we convinced you that it is observable and actionable. And, and it's something we can see, measure, and act upon. And so that's the big change, we think, in what we were able to find. Again, when we talk to anybody before this project, we talk about trust. The most anybody would come up with is three or four trust factors. And in the end, we found 25, and we also found that this is the order in which they're done is very interesting because you like anything else, you got to do it in the right order. It's like making a recipe, it is an ecosystem. So just a recap on what we've learned today, that Greg covered in the beginning. Trust is not one dimensional. Suppliers and evaluate customers too, and that reciprocity. Hopefully, we sold you on reciprocity shaped system behavior. Yeah, and we covered these points on why high performance suppliers still withhold critical data, and how performance that PWG fits into this whole thing. And importance does not mean willingness to share. That's often misconstrued and a lot of wasted time of sharing of data, and how reciprocity fundamentally reshapes transparency across the tiers. So, and then what it means to make trust observable, quantifiable, and governable. So we're on our way in our journey. So next month, at the end of the month, we'll get into Trust Acceleration Index, managing what actually accelerates decisions. And we hope to see you then. And with that, close it out. Greg, any closing comments?
No, thanks a lot, everyone, for your engagement. As I mentioned in the chat, we think this thread has legs, folks, and we're looking to improve supply chain performance, uh, improve risk mitigation and management, all through a lever called trust. So that's our story, and we're sticking to it. And thanks a lot for your time.
And yeah, thank you all for your comments. And feel free to reach out to us at any time. We'd love to get your comments and suggestions because we're at the beginning of this journey. And we'd love to have your feedback on how to make it more compelling and what you'd be looking for. So thanks again for your
Yep.
feedback.
All the
Really
best.
appreciate it. Thank you. Bye bye.
Cheers.